Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Pretty short one today, not a lot going on Sunday. Also, I need to follow up on some funding leads for the podcast, as well as catch up on email and a bunch of other stuff that I seem to be forever behind on. So I'm going to take Monday off and get that done. Got to figure something out if we want there to be any episodes going forward, and I certainly do. If there's any super important news, I'll do my best to catch it and fit it in next episode. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. You are the backbone of this community. And in light of that, we have some new polls. I have moved the poll for non-patrons to a Google form so that it should be easily accessible to everyone without having to make a new account. Thanks to Michael for the suggestion. It should also allow for a custom entry on the other option so you can tell me what I'm missing. I would really appreciate it if all non-patrons would take a moment right after this episode to follow that first link in the podcast description and click whichever option applies to you. It will help me know what's going on and how to make improvements for the community. As for patrons, you have multiple new polls to let me know how the new links are being received and whether you think we should adopt intro-outro music. Those polls are on the Patreon site. More to follow. Now on to the news. Just when you thought we'd outlawed voter suppression via poll taxes in America, Florida steps in to show us that history lives on in the South. Florida has imposed a new poll tax by barring ex-felons from voting until they have paid off their debts. This goes straight back to the birth of the poll tax, when freed slaves were kept from voting by having to pay arbitrary debts related to their previous enslavement. And that's not the only relation either. Minorities are overrepresented in the prison population, especially for drug crimes. Generational poverty and racially biased laws lead not only to a higher propensity for crime, but more severe policing and sentencing of minorities, making the poll tax for criminals a poll tax on predominantly minorities. It's all part of systemic racism, and the GOP has been subverting democracy this way for centuries. They've only become less direct about it over time. Voting is a constitutional right, arguably the most integral to our nation's founding purpose. Nothing should stand between an American citizen and their right to vote, and disenfranchising those for whom the system is working least makes no sense. Those are the people we most need to hear from. But never mind that laws like these collectively disenfranchise millions of voters, let's make a ruckus over non-existent voter fraud instead, right? San Francisco is introducing a measure to lower the voting age in the city to 16, just as in Yang's own platform, and residents will have the opportunity to vote for this in November. Surprisingly, of all Yang's policies, this one is in the running for most controversial. It's hard to imagine how including 16 and 17-year-olds in voting could be so divisive, but for some reason, people feel very strongly about it. Looked at objectively, however, I have yet to hear a cogent argument against it. First, 16 is the age at which taxation begins. Need I remind everyone that no taxation without representation was the rallying cry for the very founding of our country. Second, voting early promotes lifelong voting habits. Third, voting is currently skewed toward the elderly, so including more young people and keeping them voting longer will help the balance. Fourth, teenagers have their own issues and deserve representation as much as the rest of us. And fifth, if we exclude the young because their brains are not fully functioning yet, we would also logically have to exclude the elderly, as cognitive decline is a natural result of aging. And then we would have to exclude the mentally impaired. And what about screening for intellect? It's a Pandora's box with no end. Right now, we are being entirely one-sided with only asking if the youth are rational enough to vote. Also, if you think 16-year-olds aren't rational, have a look at the adult population right now. Yeah. Blair Walsingham held an AMA last night, which you can check at the link below. She's also running the trend #HFM Moneybomb Blair. The events for the UBI March begin tomorrow. Time flies. Let's check what's coming up. September 15th and 16th will be the Inherent Good documentary premiere and panel discussion. The 18th will be the 2020 Basic Income live stream. The 19th is the march itself, complete with bike parades. And the 21st will be phone banking for the march with Humanity Forward. Check the map for events in your area. But there's more. Today at 7 p.m. Eastern, join the Poor People's Campaign for Voting is Power Unleashed, a virtual mass assembly where they will discuss voter engagement, registration, and protection to prepare you for what's coming. On that note, make sure that you know everything about voting before your ballot arrives. If you're voting by mail, be aware that you will need to sign both the ballot and the envelope where indicated. Make sure you fill it out and send it in as early as possible. If you prefer to avoid the mail, check drop-off locations in your area, easily found by Googling voting locations for your city, or visiting the voter information sites like Rock the Vote. Mail-in ballots require checking your signature against what's on file, and if they don't match, your vote could be rejected. Also, if you don't sign in the appropriate places or get it in on time. For these reasons, you may prefer to vote in person if you're in a swing state, which now includes places like Arizona and Texas. This is the most important election in modern history. Let's make our voices heard. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Give your input on the patron and non-patron polls. Be prepared for the UBI March events and for voting. Help recruit other organizations to the cause and get everyone to sign the UBI petition. Flood Congress and Trump with calls, tweets, and letters using the Resist Bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.